My father's voice still echoes in my head, sharp as a knife. "Rachel, you're getting nothing." Those were his final words to me, delivered not in private, not with love, but read aloud in front of my entire family during the will reading. I sat there, frozen, humiliated, as my brother Michael smirked across the table, already picturing himself as the heir to everything. My mother kept her eyes down, silent, like she had been trained all her life to look away from the truth. But what no one knew, not even Michael, was that my father had left behind something far more dangerous than money. A secret. A will hidden within a will. And once I stumbled across it buried in a dust-covered wooden box in our garage, I realized everything I thought I knew about my father was a lie. He wasn't just the respected Edward Carter everyone admired. He was a man with two faces, two families, and one last explosive truth that he intended me, and only me, to uncover. And when I finally exposed it, the house I grew up in became a battlefield. If you think family secrets only belong in movies, think again. What happened in my family proves that the truth can be more shocking than fiction. Stay with me until the end, because the secret my father tried to bury didn't just change who got the money, it shattered everything we believed about him, about us, about family itself. And trust me, when the final page of his hidden will was revealed, no one at that table walked away the same. Like, subscribe, and tell me what would you have done in my place. When I was a child, people used to say the Carter family was picture perfect. From the outside, maybe it was true, the neat white two-story house with a garden my mother tended like it was her second child, the polished black car parked in the driveway, my father's firm handshake that neighbors swore by. But perfection is a mask, and like any mask, it hides the cracks beneath. I was 8 when I first realized I wasn't my father's favorite. It was Christmas morning and the air smelled of pine and cinnamon. My brother Michael, older by 4 years, tore through wrapping paper and discovered the shiny red bicycle he'd been begging for all year. He squealed, and my father laughed so loud the windows shook. My mother clapped her eyes, soft with pride. I waited for my turn. I was small, sitting cross-legged near the tree, tracing the ribbons with my finger. When my father finally handed me my gift, it wasn't a bike or a dollhouse. It was a plain hardcover book of fairy tales. I tried to smile, but the corners of my mouth trembled. "Books will take you further than toys." My father said, his voice carrying the kind of finality that left no room for protest. Michael rode circles around the living room while I clutched my book to my chest, feeling like I had been handed silence instead of joy. That was how it always was. Michael was the golden boy, the star quarterback, the one who could do no wrong. Dad came to every game, cheered so loud that the entire stadium could hear. I remember once breaking my wrist in a school play rehearsal, and when I got home with my arm in a cast, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Be careful next time," he muttered. That was it. I learned early that love in our house wasn't distributed equally. It was weighed, measured, and given in doses depending on whether you were Michael or me. My mother tried sometimes. Late at night, she would sneak into my room, sit at the edge of my bed, and whisper, "Don't take it personally, sweetheart. Your father just sees himself in your brother." But even at 12, I understood that was code for "you will never be enough for him." And yet, I kept trying. I brought home straight A's, won a local poetry contest, even got my essay published in the town paper. My father's response, a nod. No hug, no pride, no clapping like he did for Michael. Just a nod, as if I had checked a box. One memory burns sharper than the rest. It was Michael's 16th birthday. Dad rented out a hall, invited half the town, gave a toast about how proud he was of his legacy. I was 12, hiding in the corner with a slice of cake I didn't finish. When it was time for speeches, Dad put his arm around Michael and said, "This is the future of the Carter family." His voice cracked with pride. Then his eyes flicked to me, and for a brief second I hoped he'd add my name, but he didn't. He never did. As the years passed, the pattern hardened. Michael got the encouragement, the car, the freedom. I got lectures about humility, about not asking for too much. And every time I dared to question it, Dad's eyes turned cold, like I had overstepped invisible boundaries. Still, there were moments, fleeting, fragile, where I felt a different side of him. Once when I was 16, I stayed up late working on an essay at the dining table. Dad came home past midnight, loosened his tie, and paused when he saw me scribbling furiously. He didn't say much, just walked over, placed his old fountain pen beside me, and muttered, "This one's better than that cheap ballpoint." For a moment I felt seen. For a moment I felt loved. But by sunrise that moment had vanished like smoke. Looking back now, maybe those rare gestures were his way of keeping me tethered, giving me just enough hope to keep chasing something he never intended to give. That's why when the lawyer read his words, "Rachel gets nothing," it didn't feel like a twist of fate. It felt like the final nail in a coffin that had been hammered shut my entire life. The cruelty wasn't just in the words themselves, but in the years of practice that led up to them. He had been rehearsing that sentence my whole life. But what Dad didn't count on was this: every child who has been ignored, overlooked, pushed aside, they don't just disappear. They remember. They wait. And when the time comes, they dig deeper than anyone expects. What he left buried wasn't just a will. It was a weapon. And for once, I was ready to use it. My father lived his life like a man split in two. That's something I only recognize now looking back. At the time, I thought it was normal dads who traveled often, who disappeared for business trips, who came back with new suits and the faint smell of cologne that didn't belong to him. Growing up, we were told never to ask too many questions. If Dad said he had a meeting out of town, that was the end of the conversation. Michael would shrug, happy enough to enjoy the presents. Dad sometimes brought back new sneakers, a watch once, even a leather jacket that made him strut like he owned the world. I got postcards, always postcards with neat handwriting and vague words. "Study hard, Rachel." "Love, Dad." But even as a teenager, I could sense that something didn't add up. He was a lawyer, yes, but his office was 10 minutes from our house. Why then was he gone for entire weekends? Why did his phone ring late at night, and why did he step outside to answer? The first time the mask slipped, I was 15. It was late autumn, and the air smelled of smoke from neighbors burning leaves. I had gone downtown with a friend to buy notebooks. We were waiting for the bus when I saw him, my father, standing on the platform across the street. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman I had never seen before. Dark hair, red scarf, the kind of beauty that doesn't fade with age. She was laughing, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. And he was smiling. God, he was smiling in a way I had never seen at home. Not the stern, guarded expression he gave us, not the polite smirk he wore at work events. This was open, warm, intimate. I froze. My friend tugged at my sleeve, but I couldn't look away. For one suspended moment, I watched my father become a stranger. Then the bus came blocking my view. By the time it passed, they were gone. That night at dinner, I asked carefully, "Dad, were you downtown today?" He didn't even blink. No. Why, I wanted to scream, to say I saw him. But my mother's eyes flicked to mine, sharp and warning, and in that silent glance I understood we don't talk about these things. We don't question. We swallow. The image haunted me for years. Sometimes I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Other times the memory burned so vividly I could feel the cold metal of the bus stop railing under my hands. And then there were the absences, the birthdays he missed, the school recitals where his seat was empty. Each time there was an excuse, a client emergency, a late deposition, traffic on the interstate. My mother repeated those excuses like prayers, and Michael accepted them without thought. But I kept tally. Once when I was 17, I heard them fighting after midnight. My room was across the hall from theirs, and their voices carried through the thin walls. "You promised this was over," my mother hissed. "It is," my father snapped. "Don't start. You said that last year." Her voice cracked, part anger, part heartbreak. Then silence. A door slamming. Footsteps fading down the stairs. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, realizing there was an entire life of his that existed just beyond my reach. A secret orbit I wasn't allowed to touch. The final straw came just before I left for college. It was August, humid and sticky, the kind of heat that makes you feel like you're breathing water. I went into the garage to grab an old suitcase. That's when I found it, a wooden box shoved behind a stack of paint cans. It was locked. At first, I thought nothing of it. My father was a lawyer. Maybe it held documents, but the box was different, hand-carved with initials etched into the lid EB. Those weren't his initials. They weren't anyone's in our family. I tried to ask him about it once, casually over breakfast. He stiffened. "Stay out of my things, Rachel." His tone was sharp final, the kind of tone that shuts doors in your face. So I stayed out on the surface. But the box lingered in my mind like a splinter. Who was EB? Why did my father guard it so fiercely? When I left for college, I carried those questions with me like unwelcome luggage. I tried to focus on my new life classes, friends, the possibility of escaping the shadow of Michael and my father. But even in crowded lecture halls, even at late-night study sessions, part of me kept circling back to that bus stop, that red scarf, those initials. The truth is, my father had built 2 houses, the one we lived in and another made of secrets. And though I didn't know it yet, one day, those walls would collapse, crushing everything we thought we knew. Because secrets don't stay buried. They rot, they fester, and eventually they surface. And when his finally did, it came wrapped in legal paper, sealed with his name, and delivered in the cold monotone of a lawyer reading his last will and testament. The last year of my father's life felt different, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. He moved slower, his hair turned from gray to white almost overnight, and there were moments, brief, fleeting, when I caught him staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. It wasn't pride, not the way he looked at Michael. It wasn't disappointment either. It was something in between, something heavier. One night, not long before his health began to fail, I found him in the study, sitting in the dark with only the desk lamp on. Papers were scattered across the surface, legal briefs, old letters, things I didn't recognize. I stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Dad?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and finally said, "Rachel, do you ever wonder what people will remember about you when you're gone?" I froze. It wasn't the kind of question he usually asked. Normally, our conversations were about grades, responsibility, or the importance of working hard. But this was different. I guess I said slowly, "I hope they remember that I tried to do the right thing." He gave a dry laugh, one that didn't sound amused. The right thing he repeated as if tasting the words. Funny how what's right can look so different depending on where you're standing. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, he gathered the papers into a neat stack and locked them in the desk drawer. "Go to bed, Rachel," he muttered. That was the last real conversation we had before the hospital visits began. By spring, he was in and out of medical appointments. Michael went with him sometimes, strutting around like the dutiful son. My mother hovered fussing over prescriptions. I visited when I could, but every time I stepped into that sterile white room, it felt like I was intruding on a play where all the roles had already been cast. Michael was the hero. My mother was the caretaker. And me, I was the extra, the silent witness. But there were cracks. Once, when Michael had stepped out to take a call, my father motioned for me to come closer. His voice was weak, raspy but urgent. "Don't believe everything you hear, Rachel," he whispered. "Sometimes the truth doesn't sit where you expect it to." I leaned in, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He closed his eyes. "You'll see." Those words haunted me. They burrowed under my skin, replaying over and over as if they were meant to be a riddle I couldn't solve. After he passed, the house felt like it had been drained of air. The funeral was a blur. Black clothes flowers, the endless line of people telling us how good a man he had been. I nodded, smiled politely, but inside I wanted to scream. Did they know him at all? Did they know the secrets he carried, the absences, the other life? Or had he been so skilled at playing the part that even death couldn't tarnish the shine of his reputation? I remember standing by his casket, staring down at his folded hands. He looked peaceful, almost noble. But I couldn't stop thinking those hands had held another woman, had written postcards filled with half-truths, had locked away a box with someone else's initials carved on it. Michael gave a speech that day dripping with praise. My father was a man of honor. He taught me everything I know about integrity and hard work. The crowd clapped, moved to tears. I stood in the pew, my fingernails digging into my palm, and thought, integrity, honor. If only you knew. My mother said nothing. She just kept her handkerchief pressed to her lips, her eyes darting between Michael and me like she was afraid one of us would break the illusion. A week later, I returned to the house to help with the arrangements. That's when I stumbled into the garage again. The wooden box was still there, shoved behind paint cans untouched. I knelt down, brushing dust from the lid. EB. The initials stared back at me like an accusation. I almost pried it open right then, but something held me back, a strange mixture of fear and reverence. It felt like a trap, like opening it before I was ready would unleash something I couldn't contain. So I left it, but I knew it was waiting. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every cryptic thing my father had ever said. Don't believe everything you hear. Sometimes the truth doesn't sit where you expect it to. What's right depends on where you're standing. Were those warnings? Confessions? Apologies? By morning, my stomach was in knots. I dressed mechanically, listening to Michael boast about how Dad trusted me to handle everything while my mother nodded in agreement. They didn't notice the way my hands shook, the way my eyes darted to the study, the garage, the hidden places where my father's ghost lingered. Deep down, I knew the will wasn't going to be simple. My father was many things, but simple was never one of them. Whatever he had hidden all these years, whatever secrets he'd woven into the fabric of our family, they were about to unravel. And when they did, none of us would leave the table the same. The will reading took place in my father's study, the very room where I'd once found him, sitting in the dark, lost in his papers. The curtains were drawn, letting in only slivers of pale winter light. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and the smell of old leather and tobacco clung to the air like ghosts that refused to leave. Mr. Donovan, the family lawyer, sat at the head of the long oak table. His glasses perched on the tip of his nose, his briefcase propped neatly beside him. His voice was calm, professional, the same voice he had probably used for 100 other families. But for me, every syllable carried the weight of a hammer. Michael lounged across from me. His tie loosened a smug half-smile playing on his lips. My mother sat between us, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Now, her eyes flickered nervously toward Donovan as though bracing for impact. "Shall we begin?" Donovan asked, clearing his throat. He opened the folder with deliberate care, as if prolonging the moment. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat loud enough to drown out the crackle of the fire. He started with the usual formalities, confirming my father's name, his date of death, the fact that this document represented his final wishes. My gaze drifted to the bookshelves lining the walls, to the rows of legal volumes that looked so permanent, so unyielding. How ironic I thought that words written on paper could outlive the man himself. And then it came. To my beloved son, Michael Carter, I leave the sum of... Donovan's voice blurred as Michael straightened in his chair, smugness blossoming into triumph. The numbers rolled off Donovan's tongue like a jackpot investment's property accounts. I clenched my hands beneath the table nails digging into my palm. It wasn't jealousy, it was the inevitability of it all. Michael had always been the chosen one. Why would death change that? And to my daughter, Rachel Carter. Donovan paused, glanced briefly at me, and adjusted his glasses. His voice dropped not in volume, but in weight, as though even he understood the cruelty of what he was about to say. "I leave nothing." The words sliced clean through the room. My chest tightened. Nothing. Not a dollar, not a token, not even a trinket from the attic. Michael let out a low chuckle, quickly smothered by a cough. My mother's eyes darted to me wide and glistening, but she didn't speak. She didn't protest. She just sat there, her silence as loud as the words themselves. I felt heat rise to my face. My ears rang. I wanted to shout, to demand why, but my throat locked. My father's voice echoed in my head, the same tone he had used my entire life, dismissive, final. Rachel gets nothing. Donovan continued reading, but I couldn't focus. The words melted into static. My hands trembled, and I pressed them into my knees to steady myself. When he finished, Michael leaned back in his chair, stretching like a cat. "Well," He said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I guess Dad knew who he could trust. The jab landed sharp. I snapped my head toward him, my voice hoarse but firm. Trust, you think this is about trust? He erased me. Like I never existed. Michael smirked. Maybe that's what you deserved. Michael, my mother hissed, but even her scolding was half-hearted, more about appearances than defense. I turned to Donovan, my voice shaking. Are you telling me that after everything, after 32 years, my father didn't think I was worth even a single word in that will? Donovan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his papers. Miss Carter, I can only read what has been provided. Your father's instructions were clear. Clear. That word lodged in my throat like glass. My father had made it crystal clear I was nothing. But deep inside, a tiny spark flared. His cryptic words from the hospital replayed in my mind. Don't believe everything you hear. Sometimes the truth doesn't sit where you expect it to. What if this wasn't the whole story? The thought terrified me, but it also steadied me. Because if there was one thing I knew about Edward Carter, it was that he never played simple games. His life was layered, secretive, full of shadows. And shadows always hide something. As the meeting adjourned, Michael slapped Donovan on the back, already talking about investments, as if wealth was his birthright. My mother brushed past me, her perfume sharp, her lips pressed thin. No comfort, no reassurance. I lingered in the study, staring at the folder still on the table. I had the strange sensation that the paper inside was only half the story, a curtain drawn to hide what lay beyond. And for the first time that day, instead of feeling crushed, I felt a sliver of resolve. If my father thought he could silence me from the grave, he underestimated me. He'd given Michael everything on paper. But what he left me, the unanswered questions, the hints, the shadows, that was more powerful than money. Because secrets once uncovered can burn down entire houses, and I was ready to strike the match. That night after the will reading, the house was unbearably quiet. Michael had gone upstairs humming to himself, already drunk on his new power. My mother sat in the kitchen sipping tea that had long gone cold, staring out the window like she could see my father's ghost in the dark yard. I couldn't sit still. My father's words gnawed at me. Don't believe everything you hear. His entire life had been a puzzle, and now I was convinced he'd left the pieces scattered for me to find. So I went to the garage. The wooden box was still there, tucked behind the paint cans, the carved initials EB staring back at me. My hands shook as I pulled it free, brushing dust from the lid. The lock was old rusted. I grabbed a screwdriver and forced it open. The metal screeched in protest, but then with a final snap, the lid lifted. Inside were stacks of envelopes tied with twine, brittle photographs, and my breath caught a folded document stamped with my father's seal. I unfolded the paper slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. It was a codicil, a supplement to the will. And it changed everything. According to this document, my father had left a portion of his estate, a large portion, to someone named Elena Brooks. My eyes skimmed the lines again and again, as if repetition would make it less shocking. And beneath Elena's name was another Sophia Brooks, age 18. I sank onto the cold concrete floor, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. Elena, the red scarf woman at the bus stop. I hadn't imagined her. She was real. She had a daughter. And if the codicil was true, that daughter was my father's child. The fury rose hot in my chest. My entire life I had been told I wasn't enough, that Michael was the future of the Carter family, and all the while my father had been building another legacy in secret. I didn't sleep that night. When morning came, I found Michael in the dining room, scrolling through financial reports like he already owned the world. "You should see this," I said, slamming the codicil onto the table. He looked down, frowned, then scoffed. "Where did you get this in the garage?" "In Dad's box." "That's not official," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "If it was Donovan, would have read it yesterday." Maybe Donovan didn't know I shot back. Or maybe Dad didn't want it found until now. Michael's jaw tightened. "Don't start with your conspiracy theories, Rachel. You always did love making drama where there wasn't any." "This isn't drama, Michael. It's proof. Dad had another family. His face darkened, the smirk wiped clean. Even if that were true, which I doubt it, changes nothing. You're still not getting a cent. I leaned closer, my voice low and sharp. Maybe I don't want money. Maybe I want the truth. And if Dad gave them part of his estate, then everyone's going to know exactly who he really was. Michael slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the glasses. You don't dare, Rachel. You'll destroy this family's name. I met his glare without flinching. Maybe it's about time someone did. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. My mother answered, and her gasp echoed down the hall. When I came to the foyer, two strangers stood on the doorstep. The first was a woman in her 50s, elegant despite the winter chill, her dark hair pinned back beneath a wool hat. Her eyes, sharp, unyielding, locked on mine instantly. Beside her was a young woman, maybe 18, with the same dark eyes and a nervous grip on her mother's arm. "Can I help you?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. The older woman stepped forward. "My name is Elena Brooks. This is my daughter Sophia." She paused, her gaze shifting between us. "We need to talk. About Edward." The silence was deafening. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Michael stormed into the hall, his face red. "Get out! Now!" But I stood frozen, staring at Sophia. The resemblance was undeniable, the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her nose. She looked like me. She looked like him. Elena's chin lifted. "I have a copy of the codicil Edward left us. I assume you've already found it." Michael's eyes shot to me, blazing. "You told them I didn't have to," I whispered. Elena pulled an envelope from her purse, holding it like a weapon. "Edward promised to take care of us. He may be gone, but his word still stands." Michael lunged forward, trying to snatch it, but Elena held firm. Sophia flinched, her grip on her mother tightening. "This is a lie," Michael spat. "My father would never." "Your father did." Elena cut him off, her voice steady. "And deep down you know it." My mother finally spoke, her voice breaking. "Edward, oh God, you told me it was over." Elena's expression softened for a fraction of a second. "He wanted to tell you. He just never found the courage." Michael turned on me, his face twisted with rage. "This is your fault. You dug this up. You're tearing us apart." I stared back, my voice firm. "No, Michael. Dad tore us apart. I'm just refusing to look away anymore." That evening, the house felt like a battlefield. My mother locked herself in her room, sobbing. Michael raged downstairs, slamming doors and cursing my name. Elena and Sophia stayed only long enough to leave copies of their documents, then disappeared into the night, promising they'd be back with lawyers if necessary. I sat alone in the study, the codicil spread out before me. My father's neat handwriting danced across the page, binding his two families together in ink. I thought about Sophia, her wide, uncertain eyes. She was innocent in all this. She hadn't asked to be born into our father's web of lies, and yet she was the key to everything. The truth was out now. The illusion of the perfect Carter family was shattered. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Because when a secret like this explodes, the fallout doesn't stop at the first blast. It keeps spreading, pulling down everything in its path. And I was standing right in the center of the wreckage, holding the match that lit it all. The night after Elena and Sophia left sleep was impossible. The house groaned with silence, every creak of the floorboards reminding me that my father's presence lingered in ways I couldn't shake. Michael stormed around like a caged animal, muttering curses about imposters and leeches. My mother barely emerged from her room, her eyes hollow, her voice thin as paper. I couldn't stop thinking about the wooden box. I had only glanced at its contents before the codicil, the envelopes, the photographs. But something told me I had missed the most important piece. My father's life had been a maze of shadows, and men like him didn't just leave loose ends lying around. So while the house slept, I went back to the garage. The cold hit me first, sharp and unforgiving. The box waited where I had left it, its lid slightly ajar. I knelt on the concrete floor, heart pounding as I untied the twine binding the letters. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but the words bled with intimacy. They were love letters, dozens of them written to Elena over the years. He spoke of weekends away, of regret for the double life he led, of promises he could never keep. Reading them felt like watching my childhood crumble piece by piece. But then I found it an envelope different from the rest. My name was on the front. Rachel. My throat tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a letter written in my father's unmistakable hand. Rachel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I know what you must think of me, that I favored your brother, that I ignored you, that I left you nothing. But the truth is more complicated than it looks from where you stand. I made choices. I can't defend mistakes that haunt me even now. But never doubt this, I saw you. I knew your strength. That's why I chose you to find this, because you, not Michael, will know what to do with the truth. My hands shook as I kept reading. The house is yours. Not because it is grand, but because it carries the weight of all our lies. You'll need to decide whether to keep it, to burn it, or to rebuild within it. I trust you, Rachel, even if I never showed it. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. For years I had craved even the smallest acknowledgement from him, and now, when he was gone, he gave me everything, yet nothing at all. It was an apology too late, a confession written in ink instead of spoken aloud. I folded the letter back into its envelope, my breath ragged. This was it, the weapon, the spark. Proof that my father had chosen me, not Michael, to carry his final truth. But as the weight of it settled, so did the dread, because exposing this meant war. Michael would never forgive me. My mother would crumble. Elena and Sophia would be dragged into the center of a storm they had spent years avoiding. Still, I knew there was no turning back. My father had silenced me all my life. This was my chance to speak not just for me, but for every hidden piece of him he had tried to keep buried. I rose from the cold floor, the letter clutched tight in my hand. Tomorrow at dinner, everything would come out. And once the truth left my lips, there would be no undoing it. The next evening dinner was silent at first. My mother had set the table as if routine could hold us together, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans glistening with butter. But the food sat untouched, steam rising into the heavy air. Michael carved into his portion with unnecessary force, his knife scraping the plate like a warning. I waited until the silence felt unbearable, until every tick of the grandfather clock behind us echoed like a drum. Then I laid the envelope and codicil on the table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Michael looked up, already sneering. "Oh, here we go. What now, Rachel?" "Another fairy tale about Dad's secret double life." I pushed the letter toward him. Not a fairy tale, his own words. Read it. He glanced at the handwriting on the envelope, then shoved it back. Forgery. You'd do anything for attention. "It's not a forgery," I snapped. My voice cracked, but I didn't back down. "It's his confession. He left this house to me, not you." The words landed like a slap. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Michael's face flushed crimson. "You expect me to believe that after everything?" "After Dad trusted me with the business, the accounts, his legacy, he'd throw it all away and hand the house to you." I pulled out the codicil, sliding it across the table. "It's not just me. He provided for Elena and Sophia, too. He wasn't the man you worshipped. He was two men. And we've been living in half his story." Michael slammed his fist down so hard the glasses rattled. "Don't you dare say her name in this house. She has every right," I shot back. "They were his family too, whether you like it or not." My mother's voice cracked whisper thin. "Edward." "Oh God, Edward, you told me it was over." Tears streaked her cheeks, her body trembling as if she'd been holding this knowledge deep inside for years. Michael's eyes darted to her. You knew his voice rose incredulous. She shook her head quickly, but her silence was enough. The room erupted. Michael stood his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a setup. You and that woman." He jabbed a finger at me. "You're trying to steal everything that's mine." I stood too, clutching the letter in my hand. My voice broke, but the words spilled out like fire. It was never yours, Michael. Not everything. Dad chose you for his business, but he chose me for the truth. And he chose them, Elena and Sophia, for his love. You just can't stand that you weren't the only one. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth. My mother sobbed softly into her hands. Michael's chest heaved, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with something between rage and fear. Finally, he hissed through gritted teeth. "If you go through with this, if you take that letter to Donovan, I swear you'll regret it." I met his stare steady and unflinching. I've regretted staying silent my whole life. Not anymore. I placed the letter back on the table, the ink glistening faintly under the chandelier's light, like a weapon laid bare. My father's voice echoed again in my head. Don't believe everything you hear. Sometimes the truth doesn't sit where you expect it to. The truth was here, now written in his own hand, and it was about to burn the Carter family to the ground. The night ended not with closure, but with chaos. Michael stormed out first, his chair toppling backward, his face twisted in rage. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled, leaving a trail of silence thick as smoke. My mother remained at the table staring at the crumpled napkin in her lap, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, like a porcelain doll cracked beyond repair. I wanted to reach for her to offer comfort, but the gulf between us was too wide. All those years she had watched my father favor Michael, watched him diminish me and said nothing. It was a silence that could not be undone in a single night. Upstairs, the house groaned as if under the weight of ghosts. The walls felt alive, listening, remembering. I clutched the letter tighter, the paper softening beneath my fingers, as though my father's words might vanish if I let go. By the time the clock struck midnight, the house was empty of everyone but me. My mother had retreated to her room, her door locked. Michael hadn't returned. Elena and Sophia, after their dramatic entrance, had disappeared back into the night, promising only that this wasn't over. I sat alone in the study, the same room where my father once whispered riddles about truth and legacy. The letter lay open on the desk, the words etched into my memory. The house is yours. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like exile. Because what was a house without family? 4 walls full of dust and echoes. My father had given me the very thing that symbolized his betrayal, the Carter home, the shrine of our fractured lives. And in doing so, he had forced me to carry the weight of both his sins and his secrets. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. I imagined Michael somewhere out there, pacing, seething, already plotting. He had never accepted defeat gracefully. And this wasn't just about money, it was about pride inheritance, the illusion of being the chosen son. By handing me the house, my father had stripped Michael of that illusion, and I knew my brother. He wouldn't rest until he took it back. I leaned back in the chair, exhaustion flooding my bones. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. My whole life, Michael had been armed with our father's approval, using it as a weapon against me. Now the balance had shifted. Now I had the one thing he wanted most, but the victory was poisoned, because even as I pictured Michael's fury, I also thought of Sophia, the girl with my father's eyes. She hadn't asked for any of this. She was just as much a victim of his lies as I was. One day, she would come back, too demanding her piece of the truth, and when she did, I would have to face her. The letter crinkled in my fist. I could almost hear my father's voice, calm and deliberate. You'll know what to do with the truth. But the truth doesn't heal. It burns. And once released, it never stops spreading. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the house pressing down on me, its walls whispering promises of war. Michael would return. Elena would return. Sophia would return. And when they did, the fight for Edward Carter's legacy wouldn't just be about property or inheritance, it would be about revenge. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I was the keeper of the secret, the holder of the weapon my father had left behind. And as the clock chimed again in the hollow darkness, I whispered into the silence, steady and cold, Let them come. What would you have done if your father left you nothing only for you to uncover a hidden will that rewrote everything you thought you knew about him? Would you stay silent to protect the family's image or expose the truth no matter the cost? My father's secret destroyed the Carter family, but it also gave me a power I never expected. Tell me in the comments, do you think revealing the truth was worth it? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want more stories where betrayal meets revenge.